Well, hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Reading Michael Jackson. I am your host, Lena, and I'm so glad to be back here with you again today for another dive into Dancing the Dream. As I know I've mentioned this several times on the show, I'm starting to contemplate what season 2 may be about. You know, we're winding down in Dancing the Dream. I love this podcast so much. I'm thinking through my plans for season 2. So I want to, at the start of this episode, before we get into the piece, to just kind of remind you that as listeners, I'm very interested in your take on what you're interested in hearing and what you would like to see me discuss in season 2. Now, I will say my current leaning is toward a full reading of Moonwalk, Michael's autobiography / memoir. I think it would be a great project and really enjoyable because it's so different from Dancing the Dream, and to have season 1 and 2 kind of cover the two pieces that are authored by, or at least credited to Michael. You know, I think that'd be a cool thing to do, but I would love to hear from you if you have any suggestions or questions or, comments on that as a possibility or on other things you would like to see. So as a reminder, you can always reach out to me via email at readingmichaeljackson@yahoo.com. I am always happy to receive emails from people about the show, but you can also leave comments. So on Spotify and on YouTube, at the very least, you have the option to leave comments. And so if you have comments, either about the prospect of a season 2 or on what we're doing in season 1, on any particular essay that we read or poem we read or any of my commentary, please don't hesitate to reach out via email or in the comments sections as well. So with that small request out of the way, let's get into this week's episode, shall we? I'm looking forward to this. It's actually, I looked ahead at the piece, and it's one that I think will be quite interesting to discuss and that I am sort of excited to delve into. So with that said, get comfortable and get cozy and join me for this reading of a slightly longer piece for Dancing the Dream. And it is called Angel of Light. Angel of Light. It's hard to see angels, although I've stared at their pictures for hours. Some people can see them without pictures, and they tell interesting tales. Guardian angels are all female, for instance, which didn't surprise me once I found out. A birth angel, recruited from the younger ranks, attends every baby when it appears, while another angel, older but not grim, helps the dying leave this world without grief or pain. You can pray to the angels and they will listen, but the best way to call them, I am told, is to laugh. Angels respond to delight because that is what they're made of. In fact, when people's minds are clouded by anger or hatred, no angel can reach them. Not all angels have wings, so the visionaries claim, but those who do can unfurl a span of golden feathers stretching over the entire world. If you had eyes that could look straight into the sun, you would see an overwhelming angel presiding there. A more serene one smiles out from the face of the moon. Angels spend their entire lives, which are forever, spinning around the Creator's throne, singing his praise. People with keen ears have listened in. The harmonies of the angelic choir are incredibly complex, they say, but the rhythm is simple. It's mostly march time, one eavesdropper affirmed. For some reason, that fact is almost the best I have learned so far. After a while, it got lonely hearing about angels you couldn't see for yourself. When an angel watcher heard that, she was shocked. "Not see," she said, "but you have an angel in you. Everybody does. I can see it right now, and I thought you could too." "No," I said sadly. And I asked what it looked like. Did it look like me? "Well, yes and no," the angel watcher mysteriously answered. "It all depends on what you think you are. Your angel is a speck of light perched at the very center of your heart. It is smaller than an atom, but just wait. Once you get closer to it, your angel will expand. The closer you come, the more it will grow, until finally, in a burst of light, you will see your angel in its true shape, and at that very instant, you will also see yourself. So now I am looking for my angel all the time. I sit silently, turning my gaze inward. It wasn't long before I caught a glimpse of something. Is that you, angel, holding a candle? One flicker and it was gone. Yet that was enough to set my heart wildly beating. Next time, my angel will be waving a lamp, then holding a torch aloft, then lighting a bonfire. That's what the angel watcher promised. And now that I have caught sight of glory, I know enough to believe. Wow, so this piece is absolutely fascinating to me. I read it a couple of times actually after reading it for you, because I'm thinking through a lot of points I want to draw attention to. First of all, I just love to read this type of meditation on a specific aspect of Michael's spirituality. You know, not all spirituality, whether connected to a specific religion or a more like New Age perspective, not all of it involves angels. So a belief in angels is a very specific kind of spirituality. And it could be more religiously based, such as a Christian view of angels or a Catholic view of angels. But it could also be a more spiritual one. I am left, having read this, incredibly curious to know what Michael's view of angels was exactly. Where did it come from when he refers to these angel watchers or visionaries within this text? I'm wondering, who did he regard as an expert on this subject? Who did he seek guidance from to learn about angels? Because if there's anything we know about Michael Jackson, it's that when he wanted to learn about something, he sought those people who he saw as the absolute best, the pinnacle of that particular thing he was trying to learn about. He did this with great artists, with directors. He did this with business associates. I mean, he would reach out to and befriend people from all walks of life, so long as he held some sort of respect for them regarding a field he wanted to learn about, and he would interview them. In fact, I remember reading a small snippet of Katharine Hepburn's autobiography in which she talks about spending time with Michael Jackson on the set of On Golden Pond. Now, if you've heard Jane Fonda talk about her friendship with Michael Jackson, then you may have heard her talking about them skinny dipping together and all of this, which is its own fascinating detail. But she brought him to join her on that set. And Michael spent, I think, a week on set. And in between takes, he would interview Katharine Hepburn about acting. And he recorded all of these conversations. And that means, presumably, somewhere in the archives, somewhere in the Michael Jackson estate, there exists audio tapes of Michael recording Katharine Hepburn answering questions about acting. I feel the pool of an award-winning documentary unfurling within me. I can just see that. Anyway, I'm not trying to get off topic. My point was simply to illustrate that Michael was a person who sought guidance from who he considered the very best in their field or craft, and he wanted to learn. So when he references conversations in this essay to the angel watchers, the visionaries, who is he referring to? Does anyone know? If you know, email me. Comment if you have an idea of the specific people he was reaching out to, because I would like to know. I believe, from everything I've learned about Michael and religion and spirituality, I get a sense that Michael explored all kinds of perspectives in life, all different philosophies, all different religious affiliations, and he came to terms with some amalgamation of those things that felt correct for him. And this, I think, is an example. So what are angels in Michael's religious or spiritual perspective? This is beginning to give us some insight into that. So very fascinating piece, in my opinion. Now, there's many things I want to comment on throughout this piece, so I probably won't do like line by line dissection, but I want to draw attention to a few things. So the first thing is early on in the piece, in the first paragraph, Michael refers to guardian angels, and he says, "Guardian angels are all female, which didn't surprise me once I found out." And I thought that was really a fascinating revelation from Michael. Not only that whoever he talked to told him this and he came to believe this, that part, sure, that's interesting. But the really interesting part to me is that it does not surprise him that all guardian angels are female. What does that say about Michael and his relationship to women? I mean, if you look at his life, you think about the people who are most protective toward him. You have his mother in opposition of his father. He felt loved and protected by his mother, and he felt nurtured by his mother. He did not feel that from his father, though I do know he felt protected by his father in other ways. He was a protector of the family in their pursuit in the entertainment industry and whatnot. I don't think on a personal level he felt protected from his father. He felt unsafe around his father. So early on, as a child, this dichotomy between men and women as safe or as protectors is clear. I imagine he saw his mother's arms as a place of real safety and protection. But then we go on to him moving to California as a little boy and moving in with Diana Ross when he was only 9 or 10 years old and living with her for about a year, and how clearly that would have also mirrored some aspect of a maternal relationship at that point, at least. And so he likely saw her as a kind of protector and guardian of him when he was little. You continue that throughout his life. He had other close female influences, such as Rose Fine, his teacher that traveled on tour with him. You get to his 20s when he developed relationships with multiple women who were older than him, such as Elizabeth Taylor, who was much older than him, but had an extremely close friendship with him and seemed quite protective of him. Like, for example, during his Oprah interview in 1993, Elizabeth was there and she made an appearance in it, and seemingly for the purpose of watching over him and making sure he was okay during that very stressful ordeal of his first televised interview in 14 years. So it's interesting to me that an early insight we get into his ideas about safety and protection and, the roles people have played in his own life, we certainly see something interesting there about gender. It's especially interesting considering he had security staff his whole life that were men. So it's not as if there is no influence of a male figure in his life being protective, but it seems like emotionally it makes sense to him that guardian angels would be female. Now, I would be curious to know what role he sees guardian angels playing. I mean, what kind of protection are they offering in his perspective? Either way, I think that that's an interesting point and something, while this is a very spiritual piece, I think we can learn something very human about Michael and how he responded to that little bit of, lore, maybe, if we want to think about it that way. Going on to the next paragraph, I found another part kind of interesting. He's talking about what draws angels and how angels are drawn to laughter and delight. They are not drawn to hate and anger. It was interesting because this instantly made me think of, if you're American, you may have heard of this before. In the 1990s, there was this TV show and it was called Touched by an Angel. And I watched that growing up, and it was a show in which every episode there are these three angels that are kind of watching over some sort of conflict going on. And there was usually someone whose heart was filled with hate. And at some point in the show, one of the angels kind of embeds themselves in the scenario as sort of a fake human. They're just kind of showing up as a stranger and getting involved in whatever conflict is going on. And at some point they reveal themselves to the angry person as an angel, and they help them find healing and forgiveness. And I always have associated angels in that way with being there for those most desperately in need, which I often see as those who are in most pain of anger and hate in their hearts. So I found it interesting what Michael said about angels being drawn to delight and to joy. And it made me think of his song, Smile, and how that was one of his favorite songs. Obviously, it was a cover that he did, but that song is one of his favorite songs. And the whole premise is, smiling even when your heart is breaking, like putting on a happy face, so to speak, which in some ways you can say is not healthy. It's what I have always done though. And the kind of resilience that results from that for some people can be very beneficial. But I think what it really means is keeping a pure heart, or keeping your heart as pure as possible while enduring. So not allowing your heart to be filled with hate. And so if we're taking it in that way, angels respond to those who call out to them with a pure heart. It doesn't mean that people are always happy or always filled with delight, but those people who try to maintain a certain purity of heart, who try their best to fight through anger and hate and to instead harness love, when they are most in pain, angels are here to serve them. I don't know. I'm conflicted about that section, and I would love, again, another situation where I would just love to talk to Michael about this and see what would he say to such a thought. I'm curious about that. In the third paragraph, then, we get to this point where Michael is talking about how angels actually look. And that continues a bit actually as we go on. But there's a point here he's talking about the way experts and visionaries talk about angels having golden wings, feathers that stretch over the entire world. And this struck me a little bit because on one hand, I tend to think of angels as almost metaphorical. And of course, we're talking about spiritual beings when we say angels, but I don't think of them for their physicality necessarily. But this part, imagining these golden feathers, it's this kind of physical depiction of angels, like angels having wings, for example, that aligns with kind of popular culture, but that comes from somewhere, right? I mean, these ideas and these images come from somewhere. Now, is that a literal thing? I don't know. People talk about spirituality and those people who are able to see spiritual visions, people who can see auras and that kind of energetic field around a person. And whether or not you believe in that is perfectly fine. Although I would argue we only believe in the things that we ourselves experience on some level. So like, if you haven't personally experienced something, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I'm not arguing either way for how true any of this is, by the way. I'm just offering, one of the reasons I tend to stay open to anything being possible is because like my life experiences are limited, as are all of ours. So how would I know? Anyway, what I thought of as I read that, and then as I continued throughout this piece, I continued to think of this. I thought of the author Howard Bloom. Now, if you're not familiar with Howard Bloom was a publicist that worked for Michael Jackson in the mid 1980s. It was for less than a year. He worked with him during the Victory Tour. And Howard Bloom was known as a huge music publicist. He worked for Prince for like 7 years. He worked with Joan Jett. I think he worked with Billy Joel. He worked with a lot of massive artists. So he has quite a legacy in the music industry. But Howard Bloom is also a scientist and a writer. And I actually met Howard Bloom, believe it or not, a couple months ago. And I may save that story for another episode, maybe a bonus, we'll see. But Howard Bloom wrote a book about his connections, not only to Michael Jackson, but to other people in the music industry, and how these things in some ways connected to his view of science, which connected as well to his view of spirituality. Now, Howard Bloom calls himself an atheist, but I don't know if that truly fits. Don't tell him I said that, but I don't know if that truly fits, because a lot of his premise and way of looking at life is that the gods do not exist in the heavens. There's not a God running the universe, but they exist within us, and we are all individually gods, or have the potential for God within us. And his commentary about Michael Jackson is stunning. He, to this day, views Michael Jackson as a kind of living embodiment of everything humans should be striving for. I'm not even exaggerating. I mean, that is literally the way he talks about Michael. And he has written about this in his book. I believe it's called Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me. I'll double check that, but either way, I will link it in the description of the episode. Anyway, he talks about in that book his one of the only times in his entire life he had a vision, like a physical vision he saw while looking at a person. And he describes talking to Michael Jackson and hearing about Michael's goals of what he hoped to achieve in his career and what he hoped to give to the world. And he saw a vision of Michael's chest opening in this golden light. And I think he described it as being able to see all of humanity, all the children of the world, everyone inside of his chest, this almost encapsulation of the world in this glowing, beautiful golden light. And he looked at him and he saw this and he felt instantly that he understood who Michael Jackson was. Now, I have more to say about Howard Bloom. And I think I will have to talk about this in an upcoming episode. But I have more I have to say about that. But I bring that to attention because Michael's talking about these visionaries being able to see this physical manifestation of an angel with wings and all of that when they look for angels in this world. And this man who worked with Michael fairly briefly, but has kept a consistent story about him for the last 40 years, describes a vision very similar to what Michael's describing here. And I can't help but think that is incredible. That's incredible. Regardless, again, of what you believe that means, there's something intriguing about the consistency there. And so when we go on to the next paragraph, or toward the end of the first page, if you're looking in the book, when we go on to that, and Michael talks about his frustration and only hearing about angels and not being able to see them, and this angel watcher, as he calls her, telling him that there is an angel in him as well. This reminded me of what Howard Bloom says about the gods within us and the gods within Michael Jackson, or the God within Michael Jackson. And it just was fascinating to me. I saw that connection instantly, and I just had to mention this. So definitely look into this a bit if this kind of stuff interests you. Howard Bloom is a fascinating guy in so many ways. And again, I met him in June in a very happenstance way, and I would love to tell you a bit about it, but let's save that for another time. As the piece progresses, Michael talks about his effort to locate the angel inside of him. Now, I have to say, I melted a little bit while reading this. I melted a little because how many of us as Michael Jackson fans kind of see him as an angel? You know, not even kind of. I mean, there's an angelic quality to this man that is undeniable. His voice is angelic. You know, his eyes are beautiful. He has this essence and this innocence and aura around him that is completely enrapturing. And when you hear stories about people meeting him and how they respond to him, how people are drawn to him, how animals and children are so drawn to Michael. There are countless stories that you can see online of animals coming out of nowhere and coming to Michael like a Disney prince, you know, and feeling a sense of safety and comfort with him. Wild animals. I mean, there's a story I read about a falcon coming to him and landing on his arm. Like, what? You know, but the reason I say this is because the most innocent creatures in the world, when they're drawn to someone, that I think that says something about that person. I mean, they always say dogs are great judges of character, but I think animals as a whole are. Animals run off of instinct and energy. And I read something recently about how limiting our human senses actually are. Like, of course, we can see and experience quite a lot, but, you know, we have 5 senses, but there's so much of the world we can't detect as human beings. So what are animals able to pick up on that we can't? And then you think about children, and I can't remember, unfortunately, which piece it was, but one of the earlier pieces in the book, Michael talks about children and their closeness to God. And I think that maybe I added my own sort of interpretation of this, but I understood him to be saying that children, having come to Earth so recently, mirror a stronger connection to God than adults can. And as adults, as we grow more and more distant from that, and we have to kind of find our way back to it as we go through life. And hence why connecting with an inner child can be a healing kind of process. I mean, at least in part. And so I think about that and all these kind of innocent creatures and all of these pure creatures that can sense things differently than many of us, without prejudices, without hate, and them being drawn to him. And I just think it reaffirms this idea for me. Like, I'm not saying, oh, Michael is an earth angel. I'm not saying that. But I will say, if we're going to talk about angels on earth and their impact and the way they affect people and their purity, I don't know that we can have that conversation about Michael's views without pointing out the obvious, that so many of his fans do see him that way. And they do. So take that for what you will. He goes on to share these notes from this angel watcher who said that the closer you get to your inner angel, you will begin to see that it's you, and your true self will be revealed to you. And at that point, I thought, when we're talking about an angel, are we also talking about souls? I mean, if every single person has an angel inside of them, is that simply another way of thinking about a soul? Where a soul is this internal light that exists within you, that is your higher self on some level. Is that what we mean when we talk about angels. And does that mean we all play a part before and after our human life in this entire realm that he's talking about? He talked earlier about younger angels greeting babies being born and older ones being there when they die. And we talk about old souls and new souls. And, I just kind of wonder what is going on here? What is going on here? And which one is Michael? And which one are we? What kind of souls do we have? And therefore, what kind of angels do we have? He describes sitting and looking inward, which this man in his introspection is just incredibly refreshing and inspiring to me, the way he turned inward for understanding so often. I just love it. I love it. It reminded me of the song Jam and the line, "You can't hurt me, I've found peace within myself." Like that idea of that introspective nature. But it also reminded me of Deepak Chopra talking about visiting Michael during the Bad Tour, and in the evenings in his hotel room after Michael performed, he would meditate and he would, learn about spirituality and talk to Deepak about that. And, he was such a deep man. He had so much depth to him and such a desire to connect and understand life. And I find that really refreshing to read about, especially in a world where I think the entertainment industry and Hollywood and all of that can feel so incredibly vapid and superficial. And pop music in general, is kind of regarded that way. I mean, I'll tell you, for one, that's the reason I never listened to pop music before Michael. And Michael really represents a layer of depth that it's just so refreshing, both on a human level and on, looking at him as a public figure. It's refreshing. But I melted a little. I melted thinking about Michael sitting there trying to look inward, meditating and trying to find himself, desperately wanting to see and meet the angel within himself, and then feeling like he did, and feeling a sense of connection to his inner light, and coming to terms with that and believing it and trying to access it and fanning the flames of it. It does make me wonder if that is part of why, for example, when Michael, the allegations first appeared in the 1990s, Michael did not stop doing charitable work for children. He still hosted things at Neverland. He still visited children in orphanages. He didn't stop due to a public image crisis. And there are people who certainly questioned that and thought it was a very bad idea for him to continue doing it. But if this book, which was published in the early 90s, represents Michael's journey, you can believe that if he felt he had started to locate this inner light within himself and he started to understand his inner angel and what his purpose was, then that would feel so much bigger to the very real but very human threats to his life and to his well-being on this earth. If he felt what he was doing by connecting to children and helping children was more important than persecution over those things, you can kind of see why he didn't stop. I don't know. I think that when we think about Michael, it can be frustrating to not fully understand his choices at times because we view it through the lens of what we would do or what we believe we would do or our own love for him and what we wish he would have done. But if you stop and really try to think about it from his perspective, as much as humanly possible for any of us to do, I think it's a lot easier to understand his choices. Whether they resulted in good or bad things, okay. But his choices did not exist in a vacuum. This was a man who was constantly searching for his higher self and for an understanding of existence that many of us, and by us, I mean the general population of the world, not necessarily us, me and you, but many of us, do not do that level of introspection and do not do that level of spiritual search in our life. So for Michael, he may have operated on a plane we can't entirely understand, and that wasn't entirely convenient as a human being. Now, there's a lot more I could say about this piece. I actually can't believe how long I've been talking. I hopefully can edit this down a bit, but I'm over 40 minutes right now. So whatever it ends up being, just know I did my best. But there's so much I'm left curious about and wanting to learn about with Michael. I am so endeared to him. I am so inspired by him, and he makes me want to learn more about angels. And the one thing I think I could suggest from this, regardless of how you personally feel about these things for your own beliefs, I think there is something inspiring and exciting about a person who constantly learns and goes into learning with an open mind without necessarily assuming they know it all already, and who seeks guidance from those who have studied more and who know more and who's able to ask questions. And I think Michael demonstrates that in many ways, but in this piece, he does multiple times. And I really love that. With that said, I would like to draw this piece to a close for your sake more than mine, because I could keep talking, but God bless you for listening as long as you have. I look forward to returning to this book next week, continuing to talk about these themes. I feel like every week, though there are some repeated themes throughout this book, every week I get something a little bit new from this book. And I just can't tell you how much I love that. So thank you for joining me in that process. Until next time, I wish you a happy, wonderful week and weekend, and we will talk soon. Take care.